conversation. Hey, you're here. Yay.
Hello.
Woohoo.
How's, how are you?
How are you?
Good, thank you. Just trying to.
Can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear. Oh, the little bit cut out at the end.
Okay. Um,
Well, that's fine now. I can hear you.
okay, great. I think it was my hand in the wrong place. Cool. I'm really excited about tonight. This is a conversation that you and I
Me?
have been having for a while now. Um,
Mm.
so I'm really excited to kind of have it in a bigger space with other people, which is going to be really exciting. So for those who've just joined um, live is called The Vibration of Cloth. And so this conversation that Anya and I have been having for a while, talking about the vibration of actual physical garments within the fashion industry and asking certain questions around that and what does that mean. And so that's what we're going to dive into tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Thought?
excited. Sorry, what was that? Just cutting out a
Do you
little
want,
bit at the end.
am I cutting out? I'll move inside if I am.
Okay. What was that?
Yeah. I said, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, so like you said, Amy, this is something we've been talking about for a little while, and it's something that's really not talked about, the vibration of our cloth, the spirit of our clothes, the spirit of design, kind of the unseen. We're talking a lot about the environmental and societal and cultural impacts of the actual physical garments that we make, but are we considering the energetic consequences and effects that the production of our garments and the entire supply chain have on the world around us? So I guess
Yeah.
like one thing that we look at indigenous cultures, and indigenous cultures believe that everything has a spirit, like animals, humans, rocks, and that everything is sacred. So if we, just for a moment, if we imagine, for for those of you that this might be, a bit of a new idea, that everything has a spirit, everything has a soul, does that mean that our clothes also have a spirit and a soul? And how are we contributing to their spirit or soul, and how is that contributing to the world?
Yeah. And I think that's
So
really interesting to ask that question because even if you aren't, even if that's, sorry, I'm just moving aside because I think the
no
reception outside,
worries.
moving myself in here so we can have better reception.
Great.
Light off for me. Even if you're asking the question right and you don't, like that's too far-fetched for you, that everything has a spirit and everything has a soul. I think a lot of people can agree on the fact, or at least have played with the idea that everything is vibrational matter, right? So, like, when we get down to the science of it, everything at its core is vibrational matter. So, if that's true, and if we agree upon that, then what does that actually mean for our clothing? Does that mean that our clothing has a vibration to it? And is that vibration affected by the supply chain, by the people who touch it, by the way that, whether it's organic sprayed upon it, and is it affected by that process? And if so, what does that mean? Where? Like, that's an interesting question. I remember we said, okay, so if we look at this huge problem that we have in our wider world today, we have all this waste that's going out into the environment, like insane amounts of clothing are going into the landfill each week. And so why is that happening? It's like, it doesn't make sense to me that the only reason that that's happening is because we're just crazy consumers, and we're consuming at this insane rate, and we're this that's trying to eat up stuff and throw it out. That doesn't make sense to me. There has to be something deeper going on. Like, I just won't accept that that's what's happening, right? So if everything does have a vibrational frequency to it, and clothing has a vibrational frequency to it, it would make sense to me, like, let's just play with this argument and just pretend for a moment so we can interact with this idea. It would make sense, this is the conversation Anya and I were having, it would make sense that that vibration would be affected by different things. For example, if the supply chain of the supply chain of that garment, so if it begins life as a, let's just say, cotton that's got pesticides on it, that begins to affect the vibration of that garment at its core, right? And then along the chain, let's just imagine that that vibration is affected by the person who touches it, whether or not their state of being is a positive one or a negative, what they're feeling in that moment making that garment. And all along that supply chain, the vibration is, if that's true, and then the garment holds a certain vibrational frequency that's been affected by that supply chain, and then the wearer takes it, and I think the average wears is like 7 wears a garment or something. I don't know. It's pretty low.
Yeah.
The question is, does the wearer unionize a very low vibration in the garment and therefore very quickly because they don't want that frequency around them or on their bodies? And is that part of the reason, the unseen reason, as to why we have such a crisis with the amount of waste that we're generating? It's an interesting to ask, I think.
That's really interesting. And like you said, it could be, you know, it is an unconscious thing. And it's, you know, does a garment that's, you know, being produced with care and, you know, slowness, intention, love, quality, does that garment carry a higher frequency, a higher vibration than a garment that's, you know, where the material's cultivated through harsh chemical methods, where people were poisoned along the supply chain, where people were exploited, where perhaps the designer that was designing it was overworked, you know, and then the CEO of the company had ill intentions. Is that garment then a lower vibration, a lower frequency? And then how does that affect the wearer? Is that contributing perhaps to our health or our, you know, our lack of health and wellness? It's possible, because we know that the, you know, the actual physical garment, the toxic chemicals and all the microplastics in our garments actually do affect our health. So what about the actual, you know, the energetic component, the unseen, the you know, that's what's usually backgrounded in our society, but is just of immense importance. And I think going back to what you said, how the environment affects the vibration. So I think that's really, really important to think about here, about the environment that our clothes are created in and the intention of the designer. But then I guess also you can think about it in, if the intention of the wearer is pure and sincere, can that override all that's happened?
Yeah, that's also a very interesting thing to think about. Also, sometimes the intention, I believe that the intention of the wearer can override that, because I know that, you know, there's times where I bought labels that probably are, I would never buy. Like from the label itself, but I might have picked them up in a secondhand shop or whatever. And I believe that with wearing that garment has changed because consciously chosen to wear that garment, the fact that perhaps I disagree with the way that it was made or whatever, but I've chosen to pick it up as a secondhand item and love it in its new life with me, right? I believe that that space, I've consciously made a decision about that garment and I've made a choice about it. But I do think that so often our buying habits are so unconscious as consumers as well. So, I mean, we're seeing so many garments that just go to waste that have never even been worn before. They've still got their tags on them, and people have countless items like this in their wardrobes that they just have not thought through the process of buying that item, whether they need it, whatever it is, whatever reason it is, but there's no conscious thought behind it. And I do think that that has an effect on the garment. But I personally feel a huge difference between, like, I don't know if this is because I've chosen to feel a difference in it or because I'm very the frequencies of a fabric, but I can feel a complete difference in myself when I'm wearing a, let's just say a hand, like I've got these handmade, hand embroidered, beautiful pieces that are done traditionally, and you know, very high for me. It's very much got the love of the maker in them, whereas there's other items don't have that kind of, you know, I'll go into a shop and touch something and I'm like, nope, this is definitely not for me. There's a very distinct difference between the two, I feel like. I feel like if you're actually aware of the fact. I had this really interesting thought the other day, and I wrote a post about it on our Instagram about Marie Kondo, and she's done that documentary called The Art of Tidying Up or something.
Yeah.
Can't remember the title. But anyways, as part of it, she gets you to minimize your house and to bring joy to your house through tidying, right? One of the activities she does is you actually hold every item you own and you go through your clothing and you hold the item and you ask, does this spark joy? And what I found really about that was there was all this conversation that happened, right? This documentary just kind of got released in, at least in our part of the world, at the beginning of this year, I think, or the end of last. And so many people were going through and loving this activity and feels spacious and open, and I'm loving everything I have and I feel joy, right? Which is really a great activity and very beautiful to be able to do, to have a space that feels joyful. And then on the other hand, a lot of sustainability activists were, well, she didn't really talk about the sustainability side of things. And now, like, actually, the secondhand clothing shops are overrun with the crazy amount of donations. I mean, there's, like, I talk to the ladies down at the secondhand shop all the time, and they're like, there's so much clothes here. And so the secondhand shops are overrun. I'm sure there's so much more in landfill that people just couldn't be fucked taking to the secondhand shop. But what was really interesting about the documentary was that she actually got thousands on thousands of people to touch their clothing, and does this spark joy? Like, I don't that most people were recognizing what was happening there. She was literally to get in touch with the vibrational frequency of it, to touch it and to ask, does this spark joy? I mean, you are literally feeling in the vibration of the fabric of the item and asking, how does my body respond to this? And she says, if you feel joy, your body will elevate. You will notice your body will joy, you will go down. Your body will feel like, it will feel tired. She puts you in touch with the idea of vibrational frequency of cloth, and didn't use those words, and I don't think most people recognized it such, but that was what was happening. And to me, it was really interesting to see thousands upon thousands of people doing this activity, maybe not realizing it, but what it did say to me was there is a vibrational frequency to cloth, and people can feel it. It might be a very foreign concept, and it might be a little out there to talk about in those terms and those words, but people are very much able to feel it.
Definitely. I totally agree. Totally. And I don't know if you've heard of this experiment, Amy. It was by Dr. Masaru Emoto, also a Japanese man, who he conducted a lot of tests on the vibration of water and water
Yes.
molecules. Yeah. And so what he did, for you guys that don't know about this experiment, and he made a whole career out of it, is so some particular water he gathered from a beautiful wild stream that was clean of toxic chemicals. He spoke beautifully to it, played beautiful music, gave it loving intentions. The other group of water he got from a polluted stream, he gave it ill intentions. He didn't play any music or show any care or affection towards it. And these tests and experiments were done over years. And he actually found out that the vibration and the frequency, when he measured it, of the water molecules that had been given the love and the attention and the intention were of a higher vibrational frequency than the ones that hadn't been, and were actually, you know, they were cleaner, they were more healthy for our bodies. And that really goes to show that everything is vibration and frequency. And as we are interconnected beings with everything on this planet, like we or our clothes or water molecules do not stand in isolation from one another. So like you mentioned before, our environment affects everything. And I think, bringing this consciousness onto our clothes, onto, where they come from, but also I think how we treat them when we have them. And like you were saying, we can override the, if perhaps we've bought a garment that's, not from a shop we'd usually buy it from, we're not sure of the supply chain, but we do want to cherish it. How are we treating those garments? Are we caring for them? Are we just throwing them around? Are we, not really respecting and valuing that garment as an entity, as a being on its own, and also the entire process and network that had to collaborate to create that garment into being? I think, that's just something that's coming up for me as well, the care of the garment once we have it as well, which is, I think, something that's overlooked at afterwards. We look at the whole supply chain of how it's made, but then how are we treating it when we have that piece of cloth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's very interesting to think about. I think it's a conversation that hasn't been had in these words before, or at least not in a big way. To think about the idea that of putting people in touch with the vibration of cloth. And it's very interesting to consider, does that actually have a huge part to play in the whole, I guess, in the whole place that we find ourselves now with the issues that is a huge part of that, in terms of the consumer, and what we do with it as consumers, use that word at the moment, but is a huge part of that process, that, and the wastefulness that is a huge part of that vibration, of that cloth. It's what we're talking about. The water was interesting about those studies is that the actual molecules themselves were distorted. The molecules of the water was that was spoken, like he would say hate, and he would play death metal to the water, and then freeze them and actually take these photographs of them and under and stuff like that. And the actual molecular structure was distorted when it had bad words said about it or ugly things said about it, but it had death metal played to it. That's an interesting thought, because if you think about factories in places like Bangladesh, where the clothing is sitting around, where the fabric is sitting around, where women are you just placed that posted that article today where women aren't able to pay, like aren't even able to feed themselves. The words that are spoken to people in those places as they're working,
Yeah.
all that is being spoken over the fabric. Like even if like let's just play with this idea for a moment, right? There is fabric that is going to cover your body, that is going to clothe your skin, that is going to basically cover your temple, right? If you respect your body that way, it's going to clothe you and take you in. And if that clothing, if that fabric has had words spoken over it like that,
Yeah.
ugly words that are spoken about the people who are touching that clothing and making that clothing, if the person who is touching and making that clothing isn't able to feed themselves, and yeah, we talk about this a lot, but really, if she has low vibrational frequency as she touches it because of the situation that she finds herself in, and that touches the cloth and that permeates the vibration of that cloth, and then you place that on your body and you walk around, and whether or not you of it, that affects your physical vibration, because maybe you haven't chosen a different one than that. This is a very interesting thought to think about. And as an myself, it's very interesting to think about how, from an indigenous viewpoint, like Anya said, everything does have life and everything is interconnected. And so to me, it just absolutely makes sense that that vibration of that cloth is going to be affected by the person who is touching it and by the person who puts the intention in it. And when we really go back into these huge supply chains, and we go originator of the idea before it even becomes into formation, right? If we go back to the designer who's designing this cloth, if they're involved in a company that perhaps is asking them to turn out more than they can actually do in a respectful way to their craft. So if they're having to put out, I don't know, this insane amount of clothing and new design day or every week or whatever, like some of these huge companies are, and they're never in respect and craft, and they're only literally clawing at things, taking designs of other people, never actually able to be a sustainable relationship with their own craft. Does that from the very get-go affect of the entire process?
Yeah.
It's a question to ask.
Yeah, it's like, can the garment carry the trauma, either the trauma or the flourishing as the opposite, and then put that onto the wearer? Like, it sounds dramatic by calling it trauma, but I think that's what it is.
Oh, it is trauma. Of course it's trauma.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's exactly the right word.
And it's predominantly women's trauma, which is another thing. It's predominantly women that make our clothes in the supply chain. So that's something else. And yeah.
But if we flip the table, right, and we have a conversation from the alternative viewpoint as designers who are advocating for a more sustainable future, can we kind of look beyond the markers that we're given as our current best, which are, I don't know, use organic fabrics and blah blah blah, we all know them, right? Can we look beyond that and actually think, okay, so it's a vibration with fabric, and it begins that vibrational frequency is touched at every point of the chain, right? Every point of it begins with me as a designer, and my vibrational frequency affects it as well, and the intention I put into it. Then can we begin there as designers to a more sustainable future? And when we're creating something, can we make sure that the way that we create, that we make choices beginning from there that are going to affect it in a positive way? And
Yeah.
those choices would include things like, what is my mental, spiritual, and physical health like? Like, am
Yeah.
I taking care of myself at the very core of it all and at the very beginning of it all? Can my practices with myself be healthy, sustainable practices so that everything I create from
Mm,
me out has this frequency and carries frequency and, you know, has this intention with it? And I think that carries a lot. I think intention by no means is everything. You have to have action, you have to have the
yeah.
practical of it, but it begins with an intention. And if that intention, like that intention, carries something very potent with it. And so I think from the flip side, we can begin that way
Yeah.
with taking care of our own vibration, the way that we show up, the way we care for ourselves, the intention we put into what we create.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think it's also about coming back to that idea that everything is sacred and that the design process is sacred. You know, the envisioning process is sacred. The, you know, putting hands to cloth part is sacred. The collaborating with suppliers is sacred. Not, you know, not to put everything in this airy fairy land, but really to kind of understand. I don't know what other word I'd use apart from sacred, but that really kind of, yeah, to perhaps give that respect to everything in life. And if we can, you know, start to implement that in whatever you're doing, you know, you always hear about people like saying, "Oh, I felt the love in that food that you made me." It's the same in everything. But it's
Mm,
just, you know, there is that, you know, that disconnection because I think we've mass produced and homogenized a lot of things and taken that intention and that reflection, that care and that love out of the process. And, you know, it's massive systemic flaws that
yeah.
have really come out of the Industrial Revolution, but which is a whole nother conversation. But yeah, I think it's those little intentions and awarenesses every day on how we do things and the energy we put into processes. Hmm.
Also, I think slowing everything down a little bit is, I
Mm.
mean, things need to slow down a bit, but, you know, I think when we're so rushed, we don't have the time to actually check in
Mm.
with the frequency of things. I think that's when things really get fucked up. Like, for actually, even if we're going at a fast pace, right? You can still be slow in a fast pace. I know that sounds crazy, but you can still be slow in a fast pace. You can take you can take a little bit extra time to check in with the vibration of things, and that actually, once it becomes a practice, isn't that hard. All
Mm.
you're doing with it and actually going within and actually feeling like, what does this feel like when I
Mm.
get quiet? This feel like quiet doesn't necessarily mean without noise. Sometimes that can't happen. But if you actually were going through your supply chain and you sat there, right? And you were in the factory or whatever, and you sat there and you actually felt into it, like instead of just looking around, but you actually just sat there and felt, what does this feel like? When I slow myself for a minute, what does this feel like to me? Does this feel off? Does this feel yuck? How does my body react to this?
Mm.
You know, even if we just took little moments to have celebration of the different stages of things,
Mm.
and that's a
Yeah.
powerful thing to do. It's something really powerful to do. You can check in with the vibration of a fab, hold it, even if you're unable to check into the supply chain because you just
Mm.
can't find out for whatever reason what it is, but you hold it and you feel into it. Like, how does this feel when I feel into the makeup of this fabric? How does this feel for me, regardless of what everyone else has told me is
Mm.
sustainable, non-sustainable, whatever, but you began to feel into what's right for you and your process, what's right for you and the business that you're working in, and you just started to do those little activities, man, it gets you in touch with something beyond the physical. And when you're in touch with what is beyond the physical, it it I don't know how to explain it. What are the words? But when you're in touch with that, it informs the way you live and design and create in such a way that is well beyond what everybody else is telling you you should be doing, or I don't know the right words, but I do feel like it's such a powerful activity to be doing and to be bringing into. Really serious about sustainable design, to be bringing that into your practice, and alongside all the practical elements and alongside all the actual that is take to feel into things yourself.
Totally agree. I think it's like we've been talking about the not separating the spiritual and the practical, you know, the physical and the unseen. You know, indigenous and ancient cultures have just always seen it as one, and it kind of started getting let go, and we separate things. You know, there's the spiritual religion, the mystical, whatever you want to call it, and, you know, there's the practical. And when we're in business and when we're making, it's all about the practical. But really, you know, we are energetic beings in a physical body, and we need to start living like that in everything that we do. Then, you know, we need to really cut through that separation. And I know what you were trying to explain before. I feel like there's almost a feeling of support because you're not alone. You understand that interconnectedness with, you know, with something greater, you know, and with one another. Yeah, I think, yeah. I think
and you also intuition, feeling into those vibrations. You're exercising your intuition into feeling like what's right, what's wrong, what works here and what doesn't work here. And that's a huge part of it as well, is using your own intuition, I think, into feeling like we all the time. Like anybody who's ever been in a relationship with a significant other is going to know when the other person is pissed off and they say, I'm not pissed off. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong. You'll say, I can feel you. I know there's something wrong. I can feel it. It's because everything touches everything, right? And our intuition, you can, or maybe it's not even our intuition, but vibrationally feel the other person affecting you, because you can feel something's up. It's the same with clothes. It's the same with business. When you are exercising that kind of muscle, and you're exercising that, and you're tuning into those frequencies, you can pick up on that too. It's like, I can feel that this feels really beautiful to me. When I touch it, I can feel like there's a purity, like it was made in a beautiful way. Or I can feel that this cloth feels really dense to me. It feels really low vibe, and I feel like that perhaps it wasn't in a way that feels good to me to be using it in my whatever.
And I think it'd be fun to challenge everyone to do this, if anyone's open to it. You know, if you're a designer, start, you know, really thinking about, or if you just have clothes at home, which we all do, you know, really start thinking that your clothes are alive. Your clothes are living, breathing things. And, you know, you don't have to talk to them, but start feeling them out, and start feeling if they're right for you, or they're not, or, you know, how they make you feel, or I think that's how the intuition and the intention will build, by, I think, those little nuggets of reflection throughout the design process, or if you're, you know, just a wearer through, you know, your, as you buy and use and wear. Yeah.
Mm. And I think, like you said before, like you can, like the wearer can hold a specific intention for a piece of clothing. It wasn't made in a
Mm.
sustainable or ethical way. I think as you go through an activity, Marie Kondo's like does the spark joy kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
I think that if you're like, wow, I really love it, I think you can actually hold an intention for that garment. And you know, if you really want to go sage it or whatever you want to do with it, but
Yeah.
I think that like you can, as a wearer, choose to say, hey, you know, I really like this garment still, and I really wearing it. I don't want to give it away, but I do believe it's got this low vibe that's affecting me. You can choose a new intention for that garment. I believe that you can do that, that you can choose something new for it.
Mm. I totally agree.
That's an interesting point.
I've got. Mm.
Frequency is very important during production. I think it can influence. Yeah, we were just saying before, I don't know if you were on yet, that there's a scientist who did the experiments on water frequency and the vibrations of water being affected by words that you say, negative words and things like that. And yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if water can be affected by what you say to it, let alone by, then absolutely, I believe that the frequency of water in production can very much affect it. I believe that production can affect it, to be honest. I think that every step of that can affect the vibrational frequency of the garment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm. I don't know if I have anything else to add. Do you, Amy?
Not
Yeah, I
really.
think
It's exciting to have this conversation
it really
um,
is.
openly about clothing
Mm.
from this point of view, because
Mm. I agree.
yeah, I think it's to think about supply beyond. Fully agree with 100%, but
Mm.
also like, you know, what's the end result of that beyond, because most consumers aren't seeing that side of things. They don't, most consumers are completely unaware
Yeah.
of that side of things. They're completely unaware of what goes on. What you're
Mm.
seeing from once someone has bought an item onward and they're
Mm.
wearing it and throwing it away, really is that affected because of the supply chain, which they're completely unaware of. Is that vibrational
Mm.
frequency carried to them, and is that affecting the reason that they don't keep that garment, because they do not want that frequency within their space?
Mm. So many possibilities. Mm. And
I love Ability Box.
yeah. And I think, you know, I think it's like we've said before, it's about asking questions, about asking more and more questions instead of thinking we always need to come up with solutions straight away. Because these are deep, systemic, complex issues
Yeah,
that really,
yeah,
you know, are interwoven with everything. So it's really, really fun to explore these, and these are things that aren't being talked about, really.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really, what's interesting is that even if this is just so far-fetched for you,
Mm.
and it's like you guys are complete nut jobs, it's okay, we are a little bit. You know, even if that's what you feel about this conversation, the purpose of this conversation isn't that we give you solutions or that we say this 100% the way that it is. The purpose of
Yeah.
the conversation is to trigger some
Yeah.
questioning for you, so that we collectively can begin to ask better questions, because I aren't aren't taken enough. They're not well
Exactly.
that allow us to explore deeper
Mm,
beyond the
exactly.
surface level of on. And
Yeah.
so proposing ideas
Yeah.
to you
Mm,
to then
mm,
go and question for yourself, is this true for me, is this not true,
yeah.
what does mean, is how can that inform the way I design or create or wear or
Mm, exactly. Yeah. In order to see, I think, alternative outcomes in the world, which we are so desperately trying to find, we need to have alternative ways of thinking and looking at things in the world around us. So that's part of the work that Amy and I have decided to do through this platform.
yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for listening, guys. And we'll be checking in again probably in a week or so for another topic. And stay tuned because we are in the process. I think I can share it, can't I, Amy? Organizing the sustainability, an online sustainability festival later this year, which will be gathering online around ideas such as this. So stay tuned and we'll chat to you soon. Bye. Oh, yeah.
Guys, and feel free to go in. Yeah, see you guys next week.
Bye.